Northgate friends, what is going on? It is so good to see you. I'm glad to be with you today. Like John said, my name is Mike Goldsworthy, and for the last 19 years, until just about a month ago, I've been serving on staff at a church down in Southern California in Long Beach, and I just stepped out of that and launched out of that. God had been stirring some new things in me and my family, and if you come to the men's conference, I'll tell you more about it then. I will not talk about it today. But I have loved this church and hearing the story of this church for a while now. I've known Larry and Jesse from the Benicia campus. I've known them for several years. I've gotten to know John over the last several months, and I've loved getting to know Kayla. And I got to tell you, you have a great pastor in Kayla. Like, do you know that? Do you know she is both winsome and warm and friendly while at the same time being strategic and thoughtful? And you do not get that combination often. And so when I get to, one of my jobs is actually I get to help train future pastors and leaders. I'm a professor at Hope International University in their School of Bible and Ministry. And you don't get that combo very often. A lot of times you get somebody who's really winsome and warm, but they can't actually lead very well. And then sometimes you get people who can lead really well, but they're just jerks. And so you're like, I will let them be on the stage and I'll let them preach, but I do not want to be their friend. And you have this unique combo in Kayla, and I think there are beautiful and wonderful days ahead for this church. In fact, I was getting to talk a little bit this morning with some of you. I was so grateful to get to meet so many of you. And Bertie and Gordy, who have been here for so long, and their long faithfulness, and as they told me some of the stories of the old days of this church, and I just began getting this vision for the beautiful and wonderful days you have ahead. And so it's so fun for me to be with you today. And if you have a Bible on you, I want to invite you to turn to Ephesians chapter 4. If you don't have a Bible, you can use a Bible app, or everything's going to be up on the screen, and so don't even worry about it if you don't have one. Now, I love hiking. Does anybody here love to hike? A few of you. You have some incredible hiking, like just over the bridge in the Muir Woods. There's some incredible areas here. I love to hike. I love to get out into the wilderness and to walk to a place that the only reason that the thing that I saw there, the only way that you could see that was that you walked there. The only people who saw it were the ones who got out in their feet and they walked over to that place, and that was the only way that they could see that thing. And I loved to have that experience. And so for several years, my friend Doug and I, we did something every year before our kids got older. We called it our mancation. And our mancation was every year he and I taking a week or half a week backpacking trip together. Here's one of the last ones that we took. And you can tell it's been a little while because look at that baby face on me there. And that's my friend Doug. And on this particular trip that we were taking, it wasn't at the most scenic place. In fact, where we were hiking started to get a bit boring, and so I needed something to entertain me. And so as I was hiking, I would start to drift back behind Doug, and I noticed that a part of his pack was zipped open a bit. And so as we were hiking along, at one point I reached down and I picked up a pebble, and I saw his backpack in front of me, and I just kind of dropped it in. And then I started thinking, I wonder if I could do a little bit more than a pebble. And so as we were hiking along, I picked up a slightly bigger rock, not anything too big, but slightly bigger, and I dropped that in, and he didn't notice. About a half mile further, I thought, I bet I could do something bigger. And I dropped something bigger, and then another half mile goes by, and I've got something that's probably the size of 2 or 3 of these rocks. And I was like, I think I can do this. And I go and I do it, and he was like, what was that? And I was like, oh, sorry, I stumbled a bit, and I just had to grab onto your pack. And I go, oh, okay. And I got that in there, and I was like, I bet I can keep doing this. Every about half mile, I would drop something in his pack, drop something in his pack, drop something in his pack. After our 9-mile hike that day, we get to the point where we're going to camp for the night, and we're both getting out our tents. We set up our tents, and I'm inside my tent, and I'm rolling out my sleeping bag, and I hear this yelling from the other tent. I hear some words coming from the other tent that are not fit for me to tell you in church. And I've kind of forgotten what I did at this point. And so I run out of my tent. I think like there's a snake in there or something. And I go over and I say, Doug, what's wrong? And he looks up at me and he goes, and rocks just pile out of the bag. And I just start dying. And he goes, I thought I thought it was getting heavier, which if you hike, you know, this is the exact opposite of what's supposed to happen. When you hike, the further that you go, the lighter that your pack should get, because you have water in it and you're drinking water as you hike, and so you're losing some of the weight. You're eating the food that's in your pack as you go, and so you're losing some of the weight. And so when you hike, the farther that you go, the lighter that your pack should get, but he was experiencing the exact opposite. The farther that he went, the heavier his pack got. And here's what happened though to Doug, is that he didn't realize it because it just started getting normal. He just started like getting used to it. It wasn't that big of a deal. And so he wasn't experiencing what he was supposed to experience, because as his pack got slowly heavier and heavier and heavier, it got normalized to him, and that's what he got used to. He didn't know what he was missing. The next day we get out on the trail and we pack everything up and we start hiking, and he looks at me and he says, "You do not hike behind me today." And I wonder how many of us are having that sort of experience of life. I mean, your experience of life is meant to be one of freedom. The way that Jesus talks about this, he has all kinds of ways that he talks about this. At one point he says, streams of living water are meant to flow from within you. It's this picture of life bursting forth within you, this picture of life and lightness and freedom coming through you. But I wonder how many of us are actually missing that, and we're carrying all of this stuff around, and it's become so normalized we've just gotten used to it. We don't even know how it's supposed to be. We don't realize what it is that we're missing, because all that we actually know is to carry this stuff around. Maybe for some of you it has looked a bit like this, that there was that moment when your boss disrespected you a bit and did it in front of your coworkers, and it hurt, it stung. You've been carrying that around for a little while. And then for maybe some of you, there was the divorce. But there wasn't even just the moment of their divorce. There was all of the pain leading into it. And there's been all of the dealing with it afterwards. And you've been carrying all of that around. There was the infidelity. And maybe you have the hurt because you were the one who was unfaithful, and you know the hurt that you've caused, and you can't forgive yourself. Maybe you were the one, you're the victim of it, and it was done to you, and you're sitting with this hurt that you've been carrying around. Maybe it was something that was done to you in church. Even being in a room like this is hard for you to be here. It brings up memories. And it wasn't even like the church as a whole. It was this person, this group of people in some sort of way. And you've been carrying that around, and you're bringing that with you in here today. It's the regret over that decision that you made, or that decision that you didn't make. And you feel this guilt over it. You feel like, I screwed that up. And for years even, it's this decision that for years it's been just sitting there, and you've been carrying that around for years. It's that time just a few weeks ago when you opened up Instagram and all of your friends are hanging out without you, and you didn't get an invite, and you said that it wasn't that big of a deal, but really, that's been sitting there. And you saw some of those friends this morning when you came to church, and you just acted like it wasn't that big, but it's there. It's that Amazon delivery driver who hit your car and that Amazon won't take any responsibility for. Not that I am carrying that around. But if anybody has any Silicon Valley connections, I will take it. It's that thing that your neighbor does, that your neighbor's been doing and has been doing weekly. It just irritates you and it grates on you. And it's not that big of a deal, but they've been doing it. So every time they put their trash cans there, every time they play that music, every time they park in your spot, every time their dog, right? You're like, come on, your dog. Every time it happens. And it's like, if it was that one thing, maybe it wouldn't be that big of a deal. If it was one time, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But it's been building and building and building and building. And so what's happened is now we've got all of these hurts. All of these hurts that we have done to ourselves, all of these hurts that have been done to us, and we're carrying them around. And some of them are these big rocks. Some of them are big, significant things. There's somebody close to us. And they did this thing and drove a wedge between us, and it forever changed the dynamics of our relationship. And there's before that event, and that event, that rock is the defining moment in what has happened in our relationship. But sometimes it's also just these little rocks that accumulate over time, and the accumulation of them is getting pretty heavy. And you're carrying it around. I mean, I wonder how many of us are carrying around this accumulation of weight. We've been carrying it for years. And it's just become normal to us. We don't know any other way. We've just gotten used to us. And I want to tell you that this does not have to be normal. It doesn't have to be like this. It's not the way that you're supposed to live. You're supposed to be more free. You're supposed to be more light. You're supposed to have more life bursting forth. Maybe you'd have no idea what you're missing out on. And you won't know until you're able to let go of all that weight. And so today, as we wrap up our series on Mulligan, I want to look at a part of a letter that a guy named Paul, who's one of the early church leaders, we often refer to him, if you're new to the church, we often refer to him as the Apostle Paul. He wrote all these letters to churches from the first centuries, these ancient churches, because they have all kinds of relevance for us today and all kinds of significance for us today. And many of those letters are found in what we call the New Testament. And in this one letter in Ephesians, in Ephesians chapter 4, I want to look at some of what he says here that I think help us to understand how do we live in a way where these rocks are not weighing us down anymore. Here's what he says in verse 26. He says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. In your anger, do not sin." And so he's like, some of you are angry. And honestly, like, you should be angry. It's okay to be angry. He gives room for anger. He says, like, just don't, in your anger, move to this other place. But some of you have been mistreated and you've been hurt, and so you have reason to be angry. Some of you have had things taken from you, someone taken from you, a job taken from you, something meaningful taken from you, and so of course you're angry. Some of you look around and you see brokenness in the community. You see injustice all around. You see the humane ways that others are treated, and you're angry. And it's almost like Paul is saying, like, yes, I get it, yes. But it's in that place that your anger can move to this damaging place. It says, in your anger, do not sin. I love what one Christian philosopher says, that sin is the culpable violation of shalom, which just simply means this. It means that it's the disruption of the way things are supposed to be. He says that there is this disruption that can happen in your anger, where what happens is it becomes the lens that you view the world through. It becomes the thing that becomes so intertwined with the way that you make decisions that starts to be what drives you. And in doing that, what happens is that thing that made you angry, they had every right to be angry about, it starts to become bigger than just that moment. In fact, we've experienced this. We know this. This happens to us all the time. Did you ever have that time where you were at work and your boss called you out and was pretty demeaning in the way that he or she called you out and critiqued your work, and did it in front of a bunch of your peers, did it in front of other coworkers? And so it made you angry, and of course you did. It was the wrong way to do it. The things that he said were the wrong things to say, that he could have confronted you about that in a much different way, but he didn't, and so it made you angry. And so what you did is you are correcting the thing that he asked you to correct, but you're like pounding on the keyboard. You're like, I'll fix this thing for you, and you leave that day, and you won't even look at him. And when you go home, and you get home that day, do you suddenly get home, and you're like, hi, honey, I am having a great day? That's not at all what happens, is it? No, because you come home and you're carrying this now. And so you get home and you're cooking dinner and your spouse says, that's not the way that I cook those potatoes. And you're like, if you want to cook the potatoes, why don't you come over here and cook the potatoes? And you're like, whoa, what just happened here? Or maybe you even respond in the opposite way. That your anger becomes this weight and it becomes so heavy. It becomes so heavy that you just shut down. You just kind of get numb. And so what you do is you come home and you turn on Netflix and you just zone out, and like your kids are wanting to engage with you, and you have nothing. I've got nothing left to give, and you just zone out. And it's because that boss did something to you that made you angry. And there's this point where that anger was okay, but you didn't deal with it appropriately. And so you put it in the pack and you brought it home with you and you're still carrying it around. And not only are you still carrying that around, there's all these other ones that you're carrying around with it. They're all piling on top of it. And so it's affecting you. But not only is it affecting you, it's affecting all of who are around you. And so you brought it with you even here. It's with you even here in this place. And so your experience of worship, the way that you're hearing the message, the way that you're treating other people, the expectations you have of your pastor, what you want out of the church, all of that stuff, all those experiences, they are all being affected by what you are carrying around. It's bleeding into everything. And so right in the midst of this conversation where Paul says, in your anger, do not sin. Don't let it get to this place where it consumes you, where you're carrying it around with you all over the place. He's going to move to a place where, like, here's what we do with that. But he has this, like, interesting sentence right in the middle there. And I love actually this sentence because it's one I've been studying and playing around with for a little while now because I find it fascinating. Here's what it says in verse 28. He says, anyone who's been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. Like it's this random thing that it's like, Paul, you're talking about anger. He's going to talk about anger again, and you like randomly insert this thing about stealing in here. And this thing about stealing that seems like, well, this is pretty obvious advice. Like, I don't need the Bible to tell me, like, don't steal. Like, stop doing that. Like a good, obvious rule. You're breaking the norms within the community. You're disrupting the way things should be. You're damaging trust. You're taking from others. Don't do that. But notice that it's not just don't steal. For Paul, it's also don't steal. You should work. You're using your hands to do this destructive thing. Why don't you instead use your hands to do this productive thing? You should create for others. He tells them the thing that they need to avoid, but he doesn't ever stop there. He then tells them, but do the redemptive, productive, beautiful thing instead. And what we so often miss, and it's why we aren't able to effectively deal with the things that we're holding on to that we need to let go of. It's where we often actually stop short in so many areas in our lives. It's that the call to the full life of abundance that's found in following Jesus is never defined by what we're saying no to. It's not just about what you don't do. It's not just about, in your anger, don't sin. It's not just about don't steal. It's not just about don't hurt others. It's always instead a posture of yes. Of what are you saying yes to? Here is the positive, life-giving thing that you do instead. Here is what you replace it with. You are doing this damaging thing, and it's hurting you, and it's hurting others. But if all you try and do is just avoid that thing, if all you try and do is like, I'm just not going to do that, if all you do is just say no to that, it actually doesn't move you towards anything healthier. It doesn't move you towards anything that's actually life-giving. You actually have to say yes to something. Say yes to what brings more life. Yes to what restores community. Yes to what is good and right and true. Yes to contributing. Those who are stealing should steal no longer, but should work with their hands. They should produce something that's useful for those who are in need. It's not just about saying no to stealing. It's about saying yes to producing, to creating, to helping. And so he takes that idea and then he filters it into, like, what do we do with this stuff that we're carrying around? He says, verse 29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only, so there's a no, and here's the yes, but only what's helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of, here's the no, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. And here's the yes. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Get rid of, say no to bitterness. Bitterness is when that thing starts to take root in you. Say no to rage and anger when that thing becomes the lens that you begin to view others through, and that your worldview starts to be, that decisions start to come out of. Say no to brawling and slander, the way that you are going at each other, the way that you're treating each other. Say no to cell phones being on during church. Say no. True story, one of my favorite experiences when I was preaching at a church I was a part of, in the midst of the service, a song starts going off, and I was like, what is that? And he couldn't get to it, and as he's getting to it, somehow he turned it up louder and louder. And I stopped, and I was like, is that Highway to Hell? And everybody in the audience shouted, yep, Highway to Hell. And I was like, I don't know how you guys all know that song, but... So after the service, the guy came up to me, super, super embarrassed. And he's like, I'm so sorry that happened. I'm so sorry, it's Highway to Hell. And he goes, but I want you to know, here's what I'm going to do. I'm changing the song. It's instead going to be Highway to Heaven. And I was like, that's really nice, but how about you just turn off your phone when you come to church? Say no to brawling. Say no to slander. Say no to those things that are causing divisiveness between you guys, those sorts of things. And then he has this line that I think is interesting within all this, because it's saying no to this thing and this thing and this thing. And then he says it a bit differently. He says, every form of malice. It's being differentiated from everything else. Apparently it's not just get rid of malice, get rid of every kind of malice, every form of malice. Apparently that malice can take on multiple forms. And here's what malice is at its root. It's when you have so much anger towards a person that you can see no good in them any longer. It's when you've been hurt so badly that you want that other person. You want those groups of people. You want that institution. You want it to be harmed. Malice is the summation of all those other things. Malice is when bitterness has taken root in you. Malice is when your anger has so blinded you that it's driving the way that you see things and the decisions that you're making. Malice is when then you're treating other people with disdain and you're treating them in less than honoring ways, or all these forms of malice. But it's not just say no to those things. We have to say yes to something. And he says, here's what we say yes to. Be kind and compassionate. Forgive just as Christ forgave you. The way to say no to all of that weight that you're carrying. The way to say no to the bitterness that the hurt is created in you. The way to say no to all the rage that's building in you against some people, some institutions. The way to say no to negatively talking about others and the gossip and the slander. The way to say no is forgive as Christ has forgiven you. It's to name the hurt that we're carrying around. And it's to forgive for that hurt. The gift that you have received, Paul says, as Christ has forgiven you, that gift that you have received is the key to unlocking this freedom. It's saying yes to it, not just for yourself, but that it then flows through you. Now, in the New Testament, the most common word for forgiveness, it literally means to cast off, to throw away, to discard, and to get rid of it. It does not mean, the word forgive in the New Testament doesn't mean that person or that group didn't hurt you. It doesn't mean that there aren't consequences for their actions and that they don't need to be held accountable. It doesn't mean that it's safe even for you to be around that person. And it doesn't mean that you have to forget what they did. It means that the space that they're taking up in your life, the weight that it's created for you, it means that you release it from giving that kind of control. You release your need from getting retribution. You release your desire to make sure they get what they deserve. You let go of wanting them to experience the same kind of hurt that you've experienced. You release it. And it's interesting because the root word in the New Testament for what's translated as forgiveness is actually the same root word for grace. There's this intimate connection between grace and forgiveness. Because to forgive is this unnatural act. It's where they don't get what they deserve. And so it's a gift, it's grace. But forgiveness is not just a grace for the person or people who hurt you. When you forgive, it's also a grace for you. Because you're no longer carrying around that weight. It's a grace for you because you don't have to walk around with it anymore. It doesn't have a hold on your life anymore. It's no longer keeping you from life. It's no longer become the lens that you view the world through. It's no longer keeping you from life flowing from within you. It's no longer keeping you from freedom. That when you forgive, you experience the grace to be able to embrace what Jesus calls the life that is truly life. Now, Whenever I think about forgiveness, I can't help but to think of one man who has embodied this significantly. His name is Bishop Desmond Tutu. Bishop Tutu was asked to lead what was called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in post-apartheid South Africa. And so in South Africa, after 50 years almost of violent oppression of a group of people because of their race and because of the color of their skin, where there were horrific stories, like stories of one family where it was a mom and a dad and their son. And they came and they took the son who was 18 years old and they shot him. And then they tied him up and they put him over a spit, over a fire, and cooked him like he was a barbecue. And then a few years later, the same officer who led the group of people to do that came back to that same home, took the father, took the husband, bound him up and made the wife watch as he was bound, and tied to a wood pile, poured gasoline all over his body, and made the wife watch as he was burned alive. The people who were doing these atrocious things were most often the authorities. They were police officers, they were army officials. So after almost 5 decades of this, after apartheid ends, they have to figure out, how do we move forward as a nation? How do we now live together? How do we recognize the sins of our past and not sweep that under the rug? And how do we recognize that there's been irreparable harm that's been done to us, to our families? How do we deal with all that? How do we then move forward as a people? And they said, for us, the best way that we can move forward as a country was not by getting the kind of eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth justice that we actually most often want. So that's actually not going to get to the core of our problem. It's not going to help us move forward, because what's going to happen is we're carrying around all these rocks and we're going to get that justice, and it's just going to enrage us even more. It's going to fuel the fire, and we're just going to keep carrying the rocks around. We're still going to be doing it, and so it's going to have more consequences further down the road, and so that's not going to fix it. And so they said for us, the best way to move forward is to instead pursue healing and wholeness. And the only way that we can move forward as a country is to find some sort of way to find healing and wholeness. And so the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a part of that process. And here's how it would work. As a white policeman or a white army official, if they would voluntarily face their accusers, if they would confess their crime, and if they would fully acknowledge their guilt, they could not be tried and they couldn't be punished for the crime. But they had to face their accuser. They had to fully acknowledge all that they had done. And they had to confess fully their guilt. And it was highly controversial, because it's completely unnatural. That's not what we want to have done. But Bishop Tutu kept insisting this is the only way forward. And so Philip Yancey tells a story at one of the hearings where a police officer named Van der Broek comes to confess his crime. In fact, he's the one who shot that 18-year-old boy. And he's the one who then came back later and burned the husband alive and made his wife watch. And the wife, the mother, she's there at the hearing because he has to face his accuser. The judge asks her, "What do you want from Mr. der Broek?" And she says, "I want him to go to the place where he burned my husband's body, and I want him to sweep up the dust and give him a proper burial." And the officer, der Broek, with his head down, just kind of nodded, "Yeah, I can do that." And she goes, "But that's not all." She said, "He took from me all of my family. I have no family left. And the problem is, I have a lot of love left to give." And so she said, "I would like Mr. der Broek to come and visit me in the ghetto twice a month for a full day." She said, "And I want to be his mother on those days, because I need a son and he needs a mother." And she says, "And I want to embrace him right now if I can, because I want him to know that he's forgiven by God and that I forgive him too. And I want him to know that it's real." And at that moment, Yancey says, what happened is in that courtroom, the spectators who were there began spontaneously singing Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. This woman, her son had been taken from her. Her husband had been horrifically killed while she was forced to watch. She has no family left. And she has to figure out, what do I do with all this? I've got all of this. I have been hurt. I've been hurt in ways that are irreplaceable. I have been hurt in ways like it's done these things that I'm angry about and I should be angry about. And what do I do with this? And she has to figure out, will I live with the bitterness and the anger and the hurt that this has caused that I have every right to live with? Or will I pick a different path? An unnatural path. A path of release. A path where I let go, where I can begin to move forward towards wholeness and freedom and lightness. It's why I think that Bishop Tutu, when he's talking about forgiveness, it's why I think he would say things like this. He says that to forgive is not just altruistic. It's not just that forgiveness is like, oh, it's the better way. I'm a better person because I did it. He says, not just that. He said, it's the best form of self-interest. You need to do it. It's almost in some ways selfish to forgive in a good way because you need it. It's for you. It's what happens to you if you don't. If you don't, you get stuck in bitterness. You get stuck in rage. You get stuck in slander. You get stuck in malice. You become all the things that you don't want to be, and it shades and it colors all of your life, and it becomes the lens that you live through, and it becomes what's normal to you. And the only way to move forward, the only way to be free from all of that, the only way is to move towards forgiveness. It's to name and identify the hurt, and it's to say yes to releasing the hold that that hurt has on you. Now, forgiveness is a process. To fully release something, it takes time. And you might not fully be there yet with the hurt that's been done to you, because I don't know what your story is. I don't know how bad the hurt is. I don't know what was taken from you. I don't know what was done to you. I don't know the irreplaceable damage that's happened. But I do know this. I know that if you don't start moving towards forgiveness, it becomes a weight that gets heavier and heavier. And the more and more it will take root, and the more and more it will keep you from life, and the more and more that will just become your normal. Here's what else I know. I know that you don't do that alone. You don't release those burdens and those hurts alone. I'm not asking you to release your hurt into some abyss and to just let go of it out into the ether. But instead, I'm asking you to trust. I'm asking you to trust the trusting arms of a good Father who loves you and cares for you. Who says, I'll take this from you. You don't have to bear this burden. I will lift it from you. Trust the one who has forgiven you and who wants to give you life and freedom. You don't have to do this alone. Would you pray with me? And so, God, I don't know what hurts we have in this room. I don't know all the ways that the men and women of this room have been hurt by another person, by other people. I don't know what the rocks are that they're carrying in here. The burden and the weight of it. But I do know this. I do know that you promised life. I do know that you said streams of living water will flow from within us. I do know that you've said that we can be free. These things don't have to define us any longer. They don't have to be the grid that we live through. They don't have to take root in us. And so, Jesus, I pray this morning for freedom. Jesus, I pray this morning for lightness. Jesus, I pray this morning for those places of hurt that we would be able to entrust them to you, that we'd be able to release them to you, that we would not feel the need to continue carrying them. God, may they not take root in our lives. May they not have the control in our lives any longer. May they not be directing our thoughts and our actions anymore. And so,